All right, good evening. It is really good to be here with everybody this evening. One of the things I wanted to say before we get started is I just want to let you know how thankful I am to be a part of this church and this community. I've been in youth ministry a little bit, not super long, but one of the things that is probably the more frustrating parts of this job is figuring out where money is going to come from for things, and especially when we have students who can't afford to do things. And I just want to let you know that I really appreciate the emphasis that the members of this congregation place on our students being able to go to what they want to go to. Today, when I asked for scholarships for SunQuest, I literally was flooded with people who were racing to me to get scholarship money to me. And all of our scholarships are taken care of. We're good. And that happened within 10 minutes. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. At past churches, I would have to go around and beg and plead, and I don't have to do that here. And that just makes me feel really good. And it makes my week a lot easier. So thank you very much. I really, really do appreciate it. Let's start off with a prayer, and then we'll get into our discussion for tonight. God, we love you. We just thank you for all the opportunities you give us to talk about your kingdom and your word. God, we thank you for the many ways that you have blessed us. God, we are mindful tonight of those who are not here with us. We're mindful of Tracy and Cindy. We're mindful of Chris and his continued recovery, and all the others who are sick or struggling that are unable to be here. God, we pray that you will help us to understand what it means to be true followers of you and your Son, and how we can live that out in our daily lives. In your Son's holy name, amen. Okay, so we're going to do something a little different tonight. I'm just going to move this because I move around too much. We're going to do something a little different tonight. We're going to start out, I've been asked to go a little more in depth on pornography. As you can see, I don't have my screen tonight because we're just going to talk. But I've been asked to go a little more in depth on pornography, so we're going to do that first. And then I want to have a conversation about some strategies that we can use to protect our students. What we can do as parents, as teachers, as grandparents, to protect our students and to guide our students kind of through a technology-centered world. And then finally, I want to take any questions that you have. So we're going to save the last 15 minutes or so for any questions. So be thinking about questions you may want to ask that we can discuss, and it can literally be anything around this subject, anything you want to go more in depth on or anything like that. Okay? So let's look at pornography a little bit closer. Just to review some of the statistics we talked about on the first week. 32% of teens admit to intentionally accessing nude or pornographic content online. Now that's 32% that admit to it. This was done at a school, and my guess is that most of them weren't willing to admit that they do. So I think that number's higher, and I shared that with you. Of these, 43% access pornography on a regular basis. 62.1% of girls have seen pornography before age 18. 93.2% of boys have seen pornography before age 18. 33% of women age 25 and under go looking for pornography at least once per month. Okay. Now, the reason why I want to share those with you is there is generally a stigma that pornography is a male issue. Okay? And there was a time statistically when that was true. That's no longer the case. Pornography is not just something we need to worry about with our boys. I will tell you from my experience, the situations that I've seen with students where we've had the worst issues of pornography addiction have been girls. It affects both genders almost equally. The big difference is how they respond to it. And while the majority of our girls have viewed pornography, statistically, all of our boys have. And so this is an issue that we have to address because the numbers tell us that it is affecting essentially every one of our students. A couple other things. Only 12% of parents are aware that their students are accessing pornography, and pornography makes up 30% of the internet. In the past 10 years, this was a stat I shared that still blows my mind. In the past 10 years, the number of high school students who have had sex dropped from 48% to 39%. So the number of high school students who have had sex has gone down. Students who have had sex with multiple partners dropped from 15% to 10%. So students who are essentially actively having sex has gone down as well. Why is that? Well, it's because of pornography. Because our students are receiving stimulation from something else. And that should really, really scare us. It's easy to look at that number and go, yay, less high school students are having sex. That's a good thing. But the reality is the reason why they're having less sex is a problem. And it's a major problem. And so we're going to talk about that for just a second. One of the things that we need to address is that while sin stays the same and pornography, is essentially the same it's always been, how it is presented has changed. The availability of it has changed. There was a time that a lot of you can probably remember when pornography was all in magazines or books, and they weren't that easy to come by, right? Then when I was in high school, well, really middle school and early high school, we had internet. We had good internet. We had internet like we have today, but pornography wasn't that available because most of it cost money. You had to have subscriptions. So if you wanted to find pornography on the internet, you had to really look, and if you were a teenager looking for pornography on the internet, you had to steal somebody's credit card because there was not a lot of free material available. All of that has changed. And the reason why that has changed is because of a company called Pornhub. Pornhub is basically the YouTube of pornography. It is a website that has millions of videos online. What they figured out is that they can make more money from advertising than they can from charging you to view pornography. So what they do is they charge companies, just like any other social media site, they charge companies to advertise on their website. And the amount of people that use their website is unbelievable. Let me read off some of this. Pornhub started in 2017. Excuse me, not 2017, 2007. It offers millions of videos for free. Last year, it averaged 81 million visitors per day. 81 million visitors per day. That's 28.5 billion visitors last year. That's a huge number. A huge number. And it's all free. Okay. And now because of our cell phone technology, because literally our cell phones are more powerful than our computers were 10 years ago, you can access it anywhere. And so that's where we get into this issue. So here's what I want to talk about, because I think we all know that pornography is an issue. Like, we recognize that. We all know it's a problem. I think we've established that it's a problem for our boys and for our girls. But what we need to talk about is how we deal with it. So here's a question I want to ask you. You're a parent. You find out that you catch your child viewing pornography. How do you respond to that? What happens next after you find out that your child is viewing pornography? See, I'm not a parent. I think we know that. But I have been a student very recently. And one of the biggest mistakes I've seen when dealing with pornography is how we address it with students when they're caught with it. Okay. The reality is, if you have a teenage boy, this is probably going to be a situation you run into at some point. Okay? Here's what we don't need to do. You catch your teenager with pornography on their phone or on their computer, you punish them. You take their computer away, you take their phone away. You punish them, you take it away for a month, and then a month goes by, you give them their phone and their computer back, and you walk away. That's what we do a lot. is we punish because it's wrong, but we don't do anything to deal with the problem. And so what we teach our kids is that they'll get a slap on the wrist, but we don't help them to understand why it's wrong, and we don't deal with the root issue. Okay, I'll tell you about a situation that I was aware of where there was a student who had a major pornography addiction, like extremely serious pornography addiction. It started when he was about 10 and continued on, and he struggles with it today. His parents caught him with pornography 15, 20 times. But each time, they said, well, he's a teenage boy, it's a part of it. They'd take away his computer, they'd punish him, they'd ground him, whatever your favorite punishment is, and then they'd move on. But there was no plan for how to deal with it. Does that make sense? And so as parents, as teachers, as grandparents, we have to have a plan for how to deal with this, more than just punishment. Okay? Punishment's fine too, but there has to be something that comes along with that. So one thing is we need to create a plan of accountability. How are we going to hold our children, our students accountable for what they're viewing? Covenant Eyes is a great program that allows you to have an accountability partner. So basically it's a program that if I have it on my phone, I set up with an accountability partner, and that partner is able to see everything that I view online. Accountability is really important, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. By the way, as a side note, all of the things that we've talked about, the resources that we've talked about, later this week, possibly early next week, I will send out via email a newsletter containing all of those resources. So the Twitch streamers that we talked about, the different resources as far as ways to monitor your child's cell phone, blogs and things that will give you more information. I will send all of that out later this week, so you will have all of that readily available. If you have anything you're specifically looking for, feel free to ask me, okay? So we have to create a plan of accountability. Also, we need to be willing to acknowledge that our child may have a deeper problem than just watching porn. Pornography addiction is real, it is serious, and it affects way more people than we realize at way younger ages than we realize or want to accept. And so we need to be willing to seek professional help for our kids if it appears like that's the issue. And so one of the things I want you to think about, if you catch your child or your grandchild with pornography, how much and what kinds. What they're viewing matters, okay? We've gone into a lot of areas the past couple weeks that have probably not been explored in this room before, but I want to tell you that what kind of pornography your student is viewing, that matters and is really important, okay? If you have a male student who is viewing pornography that promotes violence towards women, that's a problem that probably needs to be addressed by a professional. Okay? If you have I believe it's about 70% of pornography portrays girls that claim to be under the age of 18. Okay, that's a problem. So we need to be aware of that. So we can't just say my child is viewing pornography, I'm going to punish him or her, and then walk away, because that issue is not going to go away. Okay? All we're doing is stalling the issue. Are there any questions or thoughts about that? It's not a super fun topic to talk about, but it's something we have to talk about because it is a major, major problem. Go ahead.
How do you think these children are going there in the first place?
So the question was how do students get how do they first get there in general? There's a lot of theories and a lot of different answers on that. Yeah, well, there's a lot of things. One, there has been a numbness in our society to nudity in general. Okay, so I think I mentioned last week or a couple weeks ago that there was a study done recently about asking students what they consider to be pornography. And basically what they said is that they only consider it to be pornography if it was meant for sexual pleasure. So that means that a movie with a sex scene and full nudity is not pornography in the minds of our students. A picture that's artistic of a woman standing naked is not pornography in the mind of our students. If it wasn't meant to arouse them, then it's not pornography. So what that means is that our students have a much different idea of sexuality, and they're much more numb to indecency and nudity. It's a lot of what we saw in Rome, of just a mindset of what sin and the line has been moved to a much different place than it used to be.
Do you think gaming has introduced it a little bit, and they have maybe used gaming? The pornography industry has used that as an introduction a little bit?
The pornography industry is using everything. They advertise. Pornhub right now has billboards in Times Square. They have advertisements on all major social media platforms. Their money, if you want to talk about, people like to talk about major corporations controlling politicians. Take a look at what Pornhub has done as far as the money they've given to politicians in our country. It's unreal. They're one of the biggest players in our country in general. So name whatever you want. Are they using it to advertise? Absolutely. Most of the time it's discreetly. Their name's not on it. But they're, in my opinion, this is completely my opinion, but I think that you talk about someone a company that is pulling strings in our country with an evil intent, this is probably it. I think it's one of the most dangerous things happening right now. So we have to be willing to do something about that. Now, to what Mary Lee mentioned, one of the things that we have to be careful about, the reason why there's not any students in here right now, is I read an account recently of some high school students who are members of a youth group. And one of the things that they talked about was that their pornography addictions started after a class at their church on pornography. One of the things that we have to be careful about is not underestimating the curiosity of students. We have to be careful about the timing of when we talk about things and how we talk about it. One of the things that we've done with boys in the church, and this is my opinion, but I think we have normalized the problem too much. And what I mean by that is, with boys in the church, we have talked about pornography so much that we've made our students think that it's normal for a Christian man to struggle with pornography. And so they're not as worried about it. They're able to rationalize it because in their minds, every Christian man struggles with pornography because we talk about it like that's the case. Does that make sense? And so we have to be careful how we normalize it. I think that's a lot of it. Are there any other questions or thoughts before we move on? Okay, sweet. Let's move on to something more fun. All right, let's talk about some strategies as far as leading and guiding our students and our families in general. So 2 things I want to talk about. Number 1 is access, just general access to technology. I think we know this, but I just want to remind us that constant reliance upon technology is actually bad for us, okay? I know that sounds obvious, but we do it anyways. So there's this new term. There was actually a video that went viral on Facebook about a month ago, and I actually saw that some of you shared, so some of you may have seen it already. But there was a video on Facebook that talked about a concept called digital dementia. Okay, Digital dementia is a real thing. It's a scientifically proven thing that's going to be used to describe a lot of people here soon. What digital dementia is it is a term that is used to describe how the overuse of digital technology results in the breakdown of cognitive abilities. So basically what that means is our smartphones are making us idiots, right? Here's an example of that. This will be a fun experiment based on generations. How many of you have 10 or more phone numbers memorized? How many of you have 10 or more phone numbers memorized? Okay. How many of you have 5 phone numbers memorized? Okay. How many 3 or less? Your own doesn't count. Okay. All right. So think about that. There was a time when if you needed phone numbers, you memorized all of them. What about addresses? Okay. We were in an elders meeting not long ago. Brother Merle was trying to describe to us how to get to somebody's house, and I just gave up listening about 2 minutes in because I knew I was going to turn my GPS on anyways, right? The reality is, if it's not my house or where I work, I probably don't know how to get there. Why? Because since I've been able to drive, I've always had a GPS, always. What about a calculator? Okay. Math ability has gone down in our country. Why is that? Well, it's because we don't really have to do math all that much because I have a calculator constantly. Okay? So what digital dementia means is that we have allowed our smartphones to become our brains. And our brain is no different from any other muscle. The less we use it, the weaker it gets. There was a study done recently with rats where they used lights to mimic multitasking, so looking from the TV to your iPad to your cell phone constantly. And they took the rats that had seen the lights and the rats that didn't, and they put them in a maze. The rats that had been exposed to the lights were able to solve the maze at like 30% or 30% more time. So they were basically less smart than the rats who had not been exposed to the multitasking lights. And the scary thing about it is, even when they stopped the lights, it was permanent. The damage was never undone. So we have to recognize that this is a serious issue. That being said, what are some strategies that we can use to deal with this? Well, number one, we need to create a plan for intentional access to technology. And what I mean by that is our children probably shouldn't have phones all the time. They don't need them. We have to be willing to regulate, and for ourselves, we have to be willing to regulate when technology is accessible. And so whatever that looks like for your family is fine, but there needs to be boundaries there. Dinner is a great time to put that stuff away. Time when they should be interacting with other people is a great time to put that stuff away. When your kids come to my class is a great time for them to not have their cell phones. Whenever it is, but making some sort of boundary so that we have an intentional process for our kids to know when technology is available and when it's not. That break from it is really important, and will do a lot for our students. But there's also times that we're going to set boundaries for safety. So here's what I want you to think about. Think about those of you who have a daughter. Anytime that you would not want a stranger to have access to your daughter, they should not have a cell phone.
Girls never get a cell phone.
So here's what I mean by that. If you would not want a stranger to have unsupervised access to your daughter, then they should not have a cell phone in that situation. So what I mean by that is if you would not allow a 40-year-old man into your daughter's bedroom, they shouldn't have a cell phone in their bedroom, because that's what's happening. Okay? If you would not allow a stranger to have access to your daughter in whatever situation, or your son, then they shouldn't have a cell phone there. Or at the very least, they shouldn't have internet access. Okay? So can you understand that kind of that concept? That's really, really important. Again, I'm not a parent, but just from my experience as a student, making sure your students don't have cell phones when they go to bed is a great idea. It's a really, really good idea. There's really nothing good that can happen with the cell phone after about 9 p.m. There's just not. So having that, and again, that's creating intentional breaks away from technology for your students. Yes?
As a education person that works in a middle school and a high school setting, I am in absolute total agreement with what he is saying, because you don't know how many kids come to school exhausted because they've been on their phones all night and parents don't know that.
I'm just dropping things all over here. And I appreciate that. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we can do as parents, teachers, grandparents, leaders, youth ministers, is just generally being aware. It's really awkward when I go to a parent and tell them something about their child that they'd never heard before. And there's a lot of parents, I'm not speaking here, I haven't been here that long. But in my time, I have encountered a lot of parents who I really believe that I knew more about their child than they did. As far as not who their child was, but what their child was doing, I knew more than they did. And that should never happen, ever. We need to make sure that we're aware of what's going on. So let's talk about accountability and supervision before we get to questions and discussion. What are some strategies for accountability and supervision? Number one, we cannot allow privacy to trump accountability. We cannot allow privacy to be more important than accountability. Okay? Accountability is a biblical principle. It is extremely important in all of our lives, and it's extremely important for our students. We must have an accountability plan for our students, especially when it comes to technology. And I realize that different parents and families have different thoughts when it comes to privacy. My parents didn't believe in privacy, right? They did it. What was mine was theirs. And honestly, I'll tell you, the reason why I struggled with some of this stuff growing up was not because of my parents, it's because I didn't live with my parents all the time growing up. I actually lived, I lived apart from them for a little while so I could go to a different school. And that's kind of when things fell apart, because my parents didn't believe in privacy. My door was not closed ever, and it really kind of drove me nuts. And I don't think you necessarily have to go to that extreme, but we need to be careful that we don't place privacy above accountability. So we need to know what our children are watching, what they're playing, and who they're talking to. I think the best thing that you can do as a parent or grandparent is to just be aware of what your child is doing. If I mention a video game that I know your student is playing, do you know that your student is playing that video game? If I mention a website that I know your student is on a lot, are you aware that your student is on that website? If I mention a friend that your student has, are you aware that that friend is in their life and who they are and what they're about? Generally, being aware of what is going on in our students' lives. So there's a couple ways to do that. We have some options, and again, I'm going to send out a list of all these resources later. But number one is, again, not placing privacy above accountability. So we're looking through cell phones, we're looking through computers, we're looking at what our child is doing. I know some families I think we have some families here that look through their child's phone on a regular basis. and their children know that they do that, and that's important. I think that's a good thing. If that's the approach you take, let me give you a couple tips on that. Number one, make sure that you're looking at photos, contacts. One of the things I really encourage you to do is look at the contacts and make sure that you know who each contact is. When you look at a name in their contact list, do you know who that child is, or do you not? And if you don't, ask them, who is this person? How do you know them? How old are they? Where did you meet them? All of that stuff. Also, try to keep up to date with all the apps that are available that help students hide things. So there's a lot of apps out there right now that are made to look like something innocent, but are actually meant to be able to hide things. So for example, there's one that looks like a calculator, but it's actually used to hide photos and files. Okay, so basically it's used to hide pornography, right? One of the ways that you can prevent that, parents, is make sure that your student's phone has your Apple ID account or your Android account. I think it's called Google Play on Android, whatever it is, has your account on it. So what I mean by that is that the only way they can download apps is with your password, and they don't know the password. Yes?
There's also a way, like our kids have their own Apple IDs,
Mm-hmm.
but we have to approve before they get an app. So whenever they go to the app store and we get one, we get a message, hey, so-and-so wants to get this, and we have to put our password in.
Okay. That's cool. I didn't even know about that. That's awesome. So there's a lot of things like that that are available, and you really just have to look for them. Another thing we can do is parental settings and filters. Those are important. There's a lot of options. I'm going to give you some suggestions when I send out the list of some ones that I think work well. That being said, we cannot just rely on settings and filters because there's ways around all of them. So we cannot be reliant on those. The last option is that we can use cloning services. So basically a cloning service, and there's actually a lot of options for this, means that if you have it set up on your child's phone, every message that they send or receive, every phone call that they send or receive, every Snapchat they send is copied to your phone. That's available. A lot of the carriers offer it. I have mixed feelings about it, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that is an option. There are no free options for that. Those are all paid services. Are there any questions about any of those? Yes.
If you set up the parent locks and those type of things, just be aware that your child is very smart.
Yeah.
And they will get around your firewalls and things like that if you're not diligent in locking.
So one of the issues that firewalls have is a lot of the times they prevent you from going to the actual site as far as like typing it in, but not all filters keep you from accessing it indirectly. So for example, there may be an ad or a video from Pornhub on Facebook, okay? And your pop-up blocker is not going to, or your filter is not going to keep you from watching that video on Facebook. So there's a lot of ways around filters and that kind of stuff. So the last thing we want to talk about is reactive versus proactive strategies. Okay, and this is what I think is most important for parents and grandparents, for teachers, whatever your role is in the lives of our students. Are you reactive when it comes to technology or proactive? Here's what I mean by that. We just talked about the cloning services. And I don't have any problem with that. Like I said, I don't think privacy is all that important. I think it's overrated. So I don't have any problem if you choose to do that as a parent. Here's what I do think is important, though. We can't rely on that. I think what we should not do is use a cloning service and just walk away and let that be it. Here's why. That's a reactionary method. We may consider that proactive, but by the time our child views something they shouldn't or is exposed to something they shouldn't, it's already happened and we know about it, but we now have to react to that. We haven't taught our child how to deal with that situation. We haven't taught our child how to avoid that situation. All we've done is we've made ourselves aware that they were exposed to it. Okay? And that's okay. We need to do that to an extent, but we can't be solely reactionary. We also need to be proactive. Ideally, we are talking with our children, with our students about this on a regular basis. That we build a relationship with them to a point where we know what they're watching, what they're viewing, who they're talking to, what they're playing, and so that we know about potential issues before they even happen. Being proactive means that we educate ourselves to be aware of what the trends are, what's happening, what's going on, and potential dangers our students may be aware of or may be exposed to. And also that we're not just punishing, but we're teaching our students why things are wrong. Okay? It's okay to just say, it's one thing to just say that pornography is wrong, but we need to explain to them why it's wrong and also why it's bad for them. That it's not just about it being wrong, but it's about the effects that continued exposure to pornography will have on their lives long term. That's really, really important. One of the things that I've been really concerned about is that a lot of our students, the first time that they are exposed to any sort of conversation about sex is through pornography. I've had conversations with a lot of students who did not know what sex was until they saw pornography. Okay, so think about that. That the first impression they get of sex is from pornography. What does that do to someone's attitude or thought process about sex? How does that shape the way that they view sex and sexual relationships for the rest of their lives? If the first time they know what sex is from pornography. Proactive parenting makes sure that that doesn't happen. Proactive parenting makes sure that we're having those conversations with our kids long before they're exposed to that. Does that make sense? And that's good. Yeah. Oh, okay. I think that's probably the biggest thing we can take away from this, is that if we want to help our students and protect our students and to guide them through this, then we have to be willing to dive in and get involved. It may mean that we need to learn about some things that we never wanted to learn about. It may mean that some of you moms need to learn more about Fortnite than you ever wanted to learn about Fortnite. It may mean that you need to learn about different websites or trends than you ever wanted to. But that's what we do to make sure that we're aware of what's happening with our students. Ignorance is a great tool used by Satan. And we have to be really careful to take that tool away from him. Yes?
You may have mentioned this in the previous session. I can't remember. If you don't know, I'm pretty sure you'll find out. You mentioned about the age level that a lot of the kids are being exposed via the internet or is concerned.
Yeah, there's some debate about that. General consensus is that most children have been exposed to a pornographic image by the age of 4. And then the first instance of intentionally seeking out pornography is typically around the age of 9 or 10. It's typically right around there. Yes?
You know, all it takes is one kid. I was able to shelter Hannah a lot more than I am Bolton. All it takes is one kid in the classroom who has an older brother. And then all of a sudden he's coming home asking me questions, you know, I won't even tell you what he asked me.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's, when you're just spinning.
And
And that's, you know, and it doesn't matter. I went to private school. There's 7 private schools growing up, so of course there's pros to private, but it's not protected area.
And I'll just tell you, for me, it was 5th grade. And I remember, and the reason why I still remember the student the kid in my class who first said the word pornography, the first time I ever heard it. I remember that student. His name was Danny. Hopefully he's not watching this, but I remember that. I remember that happening. And what's weird, the reason why I remember that is because he was talking about a videotape, what are those called, VHS, that his dad had hidden in some drawer somewhere, right? Which is really weird to think about now. But that's what everyone was so excited about, was this VHS tape. Things have changed a little bit. So, yes.
We don't also need to assume that it's only the bright students who are involved in this. I have a lot of incidences with pornography, like we're talking about with, they called me down to classrooms, and they called me down one day to a computer lab where my fourth graders were. And one of the little boys that if you met him with special needs could hardly even talk to you about anything. And of course, his grades were not good. He did the best he could. But he was in this computer lab, and the teacher was a facilitator. She'd go by and show them how to do a math problem and help the ones, and somebody else over here would be there, and she'd go over here, and so she was all over the classroom. But when she would leave him, he would go to the naked women.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I don't even know that you can compute, but you can find naked women, that kind of thing. And, when his mother came in, of course, she was irate and, asked him where he got this information. I think he said, you showed it to me, or I saw his daddy looking at it or something. I don't know. But you don't really, sometimes you assume that only the kids who are real techie or the brilliant kids can do this, but I found out that wasn't true.
And it's important, the last thing I'll say before we take questions is, I think I said this the first night, Satan doesn't care how special your child is. You may think that your child is the most special, innocent kid there's ever been. Satan doesn't care about that. He just doesn't. And so we have to get away from the idea that my child is immune, because 9 times out of 10, they're not. And like I shared with you on the first week, I struggled with a lot of this stuff all through middle school and high school. The adults that knew me would have never thought that I had those struggles. And we have to step away from that. So here's what we want to do for the rest of our time. If anyone has any questions about anything that we've talked about the last 3 weeks, we have some microphones. We'd like you to use the microphone so we can get it on the live feed. So if you have any questions, we'll pass you the mic and we'll discuss them. Yes, sir. He'll turn it on. Is the light on?
Okay.
All right.
This is probably kind of a moot point, but I was very curious, shall we say, as a young man, as a boy, probably as much as anyone in here. But are we just replacing the word nudity with pornography?
No.
Now, I do understand I was not curious about sex at all at the younger age. Nudity, yes, that intrigued me. But go ahead.
Yeah, nudity it's important to recognize nudity and pornography are not the same thing. It depends on your definition of it. I'll say for me, nudity and pornography are not the same thing. I do somewhat believe that pornography has a sexual intent. And we have to remember, too, God never intended nudity to be inherently sexual. That's a sinful thing, right? That in the garden, the world started with nudity not being sinful. Sin is what made that a problem, right? So I wouldn't say that we're replacing that word, but I will say that our definition of pornography as a society needs to broaden. We've narrowed that down to something that it's not. There's a lot of R-rated movies that I consider pornographic. There's some PG-13 movies I think are really close. So no, I think that's kind of a little more complicated than we make it out to be.
I just had some thoughts as you were sharing these things. One of them is I saw a TV show where this group of employees were going into a meeting, and before they went in the meeting, they were required to put their cell phone in a bucket before they went. It was traumatizing for those people to do that. And one person said, "Be careful with that. My whole life is there." You know, and that struck me as really kind of interesting about adults and their cell phones. On Fortnite, my grandson, he's 7, plays Fortnite, and I asked him, I says, "Can you buy stuff on Fortnite? Do they offer stuff to buy?" He says, "Yes, but I don't know how," so I was glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And the last thing I was thinking about is, as a preventative measure with my grandson, I'm not around him all the time, but he goes with me with female friends out to eat and so forth. And I train him to open doors for the ladies and to be courteous. And if I see him doing something, picking his nose or something, I say, when you go out with girls, they don't like that. You know? And so I think it's important that, I think pornography demeans the humanness of the other person. And if we can teach courtesy and love and compassion for the opposite sex, that might go a ways in preventing this.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I think a lot of this has to do with how we teach our students, especially our male students, to view women. But also how we teach our female students to view themselves. One of the things that the statistics that came out this year is that more girls are viewing pornography in 2017 than any other year ever. And one of the reasons why is the pornography industry has made an effort to target girls because they've already got boys. They don't need boys. That's a demographic they have locked down. So they've made an effort to target girls. And I agree that pornography inherently dehumanizes the subject, right? So that means that we need to help our girls view themselves differently. Because I personally think that when girls are viewing pornography, it has more to do with their self-image than anything else. And so we need to teach our boys to view women differently and to respect women, but we also need to teach our girls to view themselves the way God views them. And I think that goes a long way.
Something that I recently heard from a female at work about her daughter was she was caught watching the porn, and she said that she needed to make sure that she knew how to please her boyfriend. So it's like we're not teaching our kids that it's between a husband and a wife and that's a pure situation and, you know, everything is fine. Everything has to be done perfectly, and there's such a high expectation because it's just so rampant amongst the kids that they're insecure about it and feel like they have to be perfect in every way.
Yeah, and one of the things that pornography has done is it has made boys' expectations of what sex is completely unreasonable. There's been a couple studies done recently with men who waited to have sex until marriage but viewed pornography before they were married, and 90% of them said that they were disappointed in their wife. And the reason why is because what they were expecting based on what they've been seeing is not how it actually works. Typically, there's not a lot of ugly women in pornography, right? There's not a lot of, they're typically not normal looking, right? Like women in pornography are always skinny and large in the right areas and just not real, right? And so what happens is, and willing to do anything. And so what happens is that boys associate that with sex. And so their standards are raised way higher than they ever should be. Also, it makes them think, it gives them the idea that any situation can be sexual. There's been some studies done on this because pornography tends to depict some really random situations. So it's the mailman, it's the pool boy, it's some whatever, your teacher and student in class. What it does is it takes the relationship completely out of it. That boys then are trained, they're conditioned to think that any situation they can convince a girl to have sex with them. And that's where we get a lot of the predatory stuff from with teenage boys. All right, anything else? Mm-hmm. You're going to bring in the mic real quick.
Out more about the companies and politicians connected with this Pornhub without actually getting close to the site.
So let me go ahead and tell you this. I'm just going to warn you, if you Google anything about Pornhub, Pornhub is going to pop up, okay? So you need to be kind of careful. One of the things that I had to be very careful about researching this is Pornhub is actually extremely transparent about all of their statistics. They do a big study every year and they release it, but they release it on their site. And so I Google, statistics about Pornhub, and there's a line that says that looks like a study, exactly what I needed, right? But then it was on their site, so I didn't go there. So you just need to look at it before you click on the link and look at where it comes from. But you can Google all that stuff. Like I said, Pornhub has money in everything. Yes?
Based on the stat you just gave us about guys that waited are being disappointed. Now, if girls are looking at pornography more and more, then that's going to change because they're going to be expecting more of the guys, and so it's going to, instead of them being disappointed,
maybe
you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, maybe not though, because I think you have to recognize that girls react differently than guys do that kind of stuff. So really, I think what it does for the girls is it makes them expect more of themselves. I don't think it makes them necessarily expect more of the guys. And so, yeah, I think girls, and this part's my opinion, but I believe that girls have a tendency to focus more on their own shortcomings. Guys have a tendency to focus on their shortcomings too, but they also love to focus on the shortcomings of other people. And so for guys, it tends to be more about expectations of their partner. For girls, it tends to be more about disappointment in themselves. Yes?
Going back to what Joan asked about getting more information, now if we Google that, aren't we going to start getting ads and all kinds of weird stuff?
Yeah, so here's a trick I'll teach you. If you have an iPhone, here's what you need to do. And you also need to be aware that you can do this on your iPhone. If you're going to look at something like that, if you're going to Google that to try to prevent the ads from happening, if you will go to your web browser on your iPhone, I think Android can do this, but I don't know how, so you'll have to figure it out yourself. But you go to your web browser on your iPhone and turn on what's called private mode. Now, you need to know that all your iPhones have this and all of your kids' iPhones have this. Basically, private mode means that nothing you view is saved in your history. So you turn private mode on. Yeah, all of your kids' iPhones have this, by the way. You turn private mode on, view whatever you want, turn it off. It's literally made for pornography, by the way. That's literally why Apple did this, to make it easier to view pornography without then having to go and clear out your history. But what I use it for is whenever I'm researching something that is going to give me really weird ads later, I turn on private mode so that I don't get crazy ads. Does that make sense? Yes.
No, my dad went to buy a phone a couple of years ago, and the salesperson asked him a question. If do you need help with any special sites that you don't? He's like, what? He was like, well, any special sites that you wouldn't want? And he was like, no, that's okay. But I do have a question about Fortnite. It might be off for later, just for us to discuss. My biggest problem with I got lots of problems, but my biggest problem with Fortnite is the fact that I can't hear what other people are saying.
Yeah.
He's got the headset with the microphone, and I want that completely disabled. And he's telling me, well, you can't play it unless it's like that. A kid who can figure out how to work all the electronics in the house where his parents can't.
Yeah.
But he can't figure out how to play Fortnite without the headset.
Yeah. So that's not necessarily true. I will say it is easier to play Fortnite with a headset. There's a bunch of nerdy reasons why that's true that we can talk about later that I don't want to bore everyone else with or reveal how weird I am. But I love video games. They're great. But for young kids, I suggest they stick to solo mode, which means they're on a team by themselves. There's no one they can talk to anyways. If he's doing that, he doesn't need it. Now, another option is that you can buy a microphone that's a standalone mic that looks like they're in a radio station or something. And so when people talk, it's coming through the speakers, and they're talking into that microphone, and it's not just in their ears where you can't hear it. I'll try to include some links to that when I send out all that information. Yeah. Okay, and we can work on that, and I can help with that if I need to. Yes. Yes, you can filter explicit results, but what they consider explicit and what we do are a little different. Yeah, it does a little bit. So I was going to mention too, based on what Bob said, that is one of the things that we can do. I think I mentioned this last week, but if you're looking through your child's stuff and you're seeing they're getting very sexual ads, that tells you something. All ads are based on an algorithm based on what you viewed in the past. So if you get a lot of gun ads, then you look at guns a lot. If you get a lot of motorcycle ads, you look at motorcycles a lot. So that's one way that we know. All right. We can take one more question, if anyone has one.
Are there any sites that actually teach you how to play Fortnite? Because I guess I'm going to have to start playing with DJ.
So there's actually some really good YouTube videos. If you'll literally just Google, I'm a parent and I don't know, or go into YouTube and type in, I'm a parent and I don't know how to play Fortnite. There's people that have thought about that. And that's actually, YouTube is really helpful for that. So let me tell you, as a parent or a grandparent, if there's something that you want to learn more about, someone has made a YouTube video about it. And so if your family, if your kids are talking about something weird, your grandkids are talking about something, and you don't know what that is, go to YouTube, look it up, and they'll show you what it is, how to use it, all that stuff. The last thing I wanted to mention that I'd forgotten to is, how many of you have ever heard your kids say something and you had no idea what it meant? Yeah, okay. So what we have to recognize is that our teenagers have a totally different language than we do. And it's hard to keep up with because, like technology, it changes like every week. The words that my students here use is totally different than what they used 2 years ago when I was at Rockledge. It's all changed. It changes constantly. So one of the things I can suggest for you, and this is a site that you need to be kind of careful with. I wouldn't have your students go to it, but there's a site called urbandictionary.com. And what it is for is it basically gives you the definition of slang. And it changes as the slang changes. It's updated constantly. The reason why I wouldn't suggest it for your kids is a lot of the slang they use is not good. And it's really awkward for me when I go to dinner with parents and I hear their kids saying things and I know that their parents have no idea what they're saying. And a lot of times, to be honest, our students don't even know what they're saying. They hear the word in a song. A lot of the slang they use actually comes from gang language, and they don't even understand the original meaning. And so you may hear your child say an acronym or something, or some sort of word. You'll hear it, and then you'll go look it up on Urban Dictionary and realize that they don't even know what it means because it's bad, like really bad. So Urban Dictionary is a good site to use. There's a lot of rough content on there because our students use a lot of language that's rough. So anyways, we're out of time. Thank you very much for allowing us to do this the last 3 weeks. I've enjoyed it. I've been a little sick the last couple weeks, so I've had a hard time staying focused, but I really appreciate your questions and your excitement and your encouragement throughout this process. If you have any questions or anything that you need help with, please don't feel afraid to come to me, and I would love to help you with that. Again, we will send out a list of resources and things to help you here in the next week or so. If you need anything, don't hesitate to send me an email or give me a call. So let's close in a prayer, and then we'll be done for the night. God, we love you, and again, we just thank you for the ways that you have blessed us. God, we pray that you help us just to be mindful of how we protect our students, how we teach our students to follow you, and especially in a world that is constantly changing. We know that Satan attacks us in many different ways, and we just pray that you will help us to use wisdom and discernment as we seek to protect and guide our students, our families, and ourselves. Thank you. We love you. In your son's holy name, amen. Also, I forgot, if there's anyone that did not partake of the Lord's Supper this morning, you could go ahead and go to the fellowship hall. Brother Mike will help you with that. Everyone else is dismissed.